Sneakers and Cleats, the podcast.
Welcome in, everybody. Another episode of Sneakers and Cleats. Zack Hedrick and Chuck Miketinac alongside here. Pinch hitting once again as Matt Roy is out doing the important stuff, going over the Uvalde report from the Department of Justice and everything. So while we talk in the toy department.
Absolutely. Don will be on the next one too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Out of commission today.
A lot to get to. I mean, Cowboys, Texans, Spurs, of course, another divisional playoff weekend, one that the Cowboys will not be a part of after the embarrassing butt whipping that was given to them by the Green Bay Packers.
I think if all Packer fans are being honest, I think most of them would admit that that's probably, in for sure recent memory, the most unprepared they could have possibly have been to accept a victory. I don't know any Packer fan that saw that one coming other than my mother. Well, and that's it.
And the inverse of that, you know, everybody on the Cowboys side were just like, where was this coming from?
And it was almost as if, at least it felt like to me, that now looking back, that they almost just overlooked the team that had to win the last two to get in. You won 16 in a row. I mean, that was all the feel of that.
It was
and
all set up.
I don't know. Maybe that's a bad take, but that's
no,
what I think.
I'm with you. It was all set up for the Cowboys. It was there on a silver platter. It's like, this is the path that you wanted, that you talked about all the way back in Oxnard, back in August, whatever it was. This is the best thing that you could have set up for yourself, maybe aside from a 1 seed, and you just blew it. But we'll get in more on that in just a little bit. We're kind of putting the cart before the horse here a little bit, but first we need to get to our, as always, our number game. Episode 68. Not too many numbers for 60 athletes or players who have repped 68, but jotted a couple down here. Jaromir Jagr, hockey. Not too many hockey references here in South Texas, but.
You know what? I'm glad you had a cheat sheet because I'm going to go with Jaromir Jagr too. I mean, I can't.
Czechoslovakian, kind of from your neck of the
in,
woods.
You check out.
Your neck of the woods from the old country a little
bit. Right.
So
a little bit north.
Yeah. And then another one, Herbert Scott, for Cowboys fans from of a certain vintage. He was made the Pro Bowl 3 straight seasons, All-Pro 2 times, Super Bowl champ in Super Bowl 12.
Okay.
So, some fans out there, I'm sure, maybe remember Herbert Scott, so part of a good offensive line and everything. So, and then there's a bunch of guys, baseballs, there's no good 68s there. It's kind of what I call a call-up number. It's somebody, they're there from AA or AAA, and here you go, guy, go out there and play a position for a little bit.
100%. Yeah.
Make a spot start, and, we'll turn that back in at the end of the week. So now to the Cowboys, lots to dive into. I know it wasn't discussed because of Monday, Martin Luther King Day, obviously. Embarrassment, so many ways to describe Sunday's game. Where do you begin? Of course, now the bigger news is McCarthy is coming back, which I don't know if too many people saw, given what Jerry Jones said after the Washington game and, just his utter surprise after the loss on Sunday. So now, where does this team go with McCarthy at the helm again?
I don't know. I mean, we've been able to kick this around for 4 or 5 days. And, I mean, for everything that they achieved this year, a top 5 offense, a top 5 defense, a special teams, they gave up fewer points than anybody else in the league in terms of special teams. You're right. It was all setting up. I think, okay, so we're recording this today, Thursday. McCarthy just got done talking, and he said, hey, I'm still numb. I'm still in shock. It's like, I don't blame him. I'm still in shock, and I don't have a dog in the hunt.
Right.
I mean, it was hard to fathom what we were watching in real time, and I think most Cowboy fans would agree, right? I mean, none of what we saw on Sunday, there was nothing during the season that prepared us for what we saw. Even the 49er game, as bad as that was, this one absolutely took the cake. There was nothing in that game where you go, wow, that's the team I watched all year. I mean, they came out and ran the ball, 4 of the first 5 snaps? That was odd to me. I get trying to establish we're going to smash mouth, but at some point you are who you are. It's Dak throwing it. It's 88 running all over the field. And then to see how disjointed Dak and CD were, and then just the conversations they were having internally, it was like, it looked like that was the first time they'd stepped on the field together.
Right.
In a lot of ways. I mean, you can start with that, and then obviously the first drive of the Packers where threw a goose right down the field.
Defense
it was
couldn't
just
stop
one
running
thing
those.
after another, and it was never really a game until LaFleur started
Yeah, the Cowboys
managing
woke up
for next week, which you can't do in the playoffs.
Right. Cowboys woke up late and made it one play away from being a one-score game, as odd as that sounds, given how in hand that game was, probably midway through the third quarter. But something that McCarthy, I know you were listening to it, I listened to it a little bit earlier, it was interesting. One of the comments he said is we were playing too fast. And when he went back and was watching the game again, that was something that it's like, yeah, we were too far in front of our feet. I think a little bit playing too fast in some aspects, obviously on offense. And that was something that Dak mentioned after the game, trying to be too keyed up. And it's like, well, you guys have the experience. Y'all should know, hey, we need to throttle it back and just do what we do.
Or, design a play for Dak to get his feet underneath him early on. A little check down pass, a screen, whatever it is, a shovel pass, something that slows the game down for him if he felt that was going to be the way it was going to be. I don't know that McCarthy could have known that pre-hand, but I don't know. It's just mind-boggling, all of it. I know the Packers used to do this with Favre because he'd be too keyed up to start a game. So they always give him something easy, a little dunker.
Get into
to
the
start.
flow.
Yeah, just like, hey, you see it. It's a completion. Wow, we've done this a million times. And then, I think
it's
the
just
brain tends to relax a little bit.
Yeah, just playing football. And, of course, a lot of Cowboys fans now with McCarthy returning, some of them, I would even say a lot of them, are kind of already writing off next season too, because it's just like, well, here we go, same old, same old. Jerry may be too loyal to a fault, but it's got to be said for something that 3 12-win seasons in a row. Now, history would say you're not going to win the division again next season because that hasn't been done in 20 years, but you're in the hunt for 3 straight years. You get to the postseason. Something's got to be said for that. It's just postseason, it ain't happening.
Right. I mean, I would say history says they're not going to repeat and win the division, but they did it this year. And looking at how badly the Eagles finished the season, and then that looked like you think the Cowboys are in disarray.
Phillies, and
that looks really, really like a bad situation. I mean, just body language after that game, the Tampa Bay game, and during the game, and then Washington and the Giants. Both of those teams don't look like
they're not going to be challenging anytime soon.
Right. So, maybe at the end of this there was a lot of fool's gold this year because the Cowboys were historically good inside the division in terms of point differential this year. Like they were better than anybody in the last 23 years in terms of kicking teams in their division's keisters. And maybe we all bought into that a little too much. Although, again, they were non-common opponents. They beat the tar out of the Rams. The Rams ended up making the playoffs. They weren't good, obviously, against the 49ers. They beat the Seahawks, who were a playoff contender, although that was a close game. It's just really hard to get a read again and trying to explain away what we just saw last Sunday is what this all comes down to.
And if McCarthy's not going to be held accountable, Dak said, well, if you hold him accountable, you got to do the same for me. With McCarthy coming back, you got to figure, well, Dak's coming back and his gargantuan contract. It's going to be interesting how they make all the pieces fit next year. So who do you think is going to be held accountable? To me, it's going to be Dan Quinn, but he's probably got one foot out the door with a head coaching opportunity.
It sure seems like it, right? I mean, if you've got 5 interviews lined up with other teams, I think it's safe to say at this point that he gets one of them, that somebody's going to offer him that job. And so they will be in the market for a defensive coordinator, you have to think, and maybe that played into some of Jerry's reasoning as to why we go another year with McCarthy, because he has been amazing. I mean, 36 wins in 3 years doesn't happen very often.
Right.
But do you want to have to replace 2 coordinators if Dan Quinn gets another job? So that's a lot of upheaval and a lot of reinventing the wheel, so to speak, for a team that did win 12 games.
Yeah. And lots of questions, of course, and you mentioned it, McCarthy still being numb. They're still obviously going through a lot and filtering through everything, evaluating everything. They've had the player exit interviews already. I really think it's going to be an interesting offseason, especially with the dollar and cents side of it, how they make all the pieces fit, because you got to pay CD now, and Mike is going come on the books soon, big time too. So it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, this is the question that everybody wants to answer. What needs to happen to this team in order to fix things in the postseason? I really think, I mean, sure, McCarthy gets you there. The postseason, postseason success hasn't been there. It's almost like they need a guy like Jim Rackley to fire him up and, get these guys, emotionally keyed up to go out there, and because they looked flat on Sunday.
Well, I 100%. I don't know if there was needed a Newt Rockne speech of some sort before the game.
And you can't do that all the time, because then it kind of gets, falls on deaf ears.
Right. The year before, McCarthy aptly gets criticized for making that Green Bay game about him, and I think he maybe probably he did. He said he learned his lesson from that,
right?
About what he did during that week that he would not repeat. And, maybe there wasn't enough emotional juice invested into that game. But you're right. To me, looking at the whole thing in totality, they looked old and slow in that game and confused. Does the next coordinator coming in have to be an expert at stopping the West Coast defense? I mean, the West Coast offense, now that you've seen how San Francisco does against you, and now Green Bay, they're running variations. I mean, but the Cowboys see enough of that every day in practice. Again, I just go back to, I still don't believe what I just saw.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what transpires as far as, coaching changes. A lot of fans calling for accountability in the offseason. Will it happen? Maybe not, especially with McCarthy coming back. So we're going to change gears now and move to the Texans, a Texas team that is having success in the postseason in the NFL, just mopping the floor with Cleveland at their place. Now they go on the road playing Baltimore. What do you see happening in this game on Saturday, Chuck?
Well, I mean, if the Texans knock off Baltimore, I mean, they're a, 9.5-point dog or 10-point dog in that
Somewhere
game.
Around in that neighborhood.
Again, just getting to this point for them. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum. To lose the amount of offensive linemen that they lost early on in the year, and then to see how many other pieces have been kind of whittled off of this roster as we've gone forward. Again, this is the most banged up team in the NFL that's in the postseason, and
they're still finding ways.
They still have more guys on IR than anybody else in football right now. So they do. And, just listening to D'Amico Ryan's talk this week, I kind of like the mantra. It's essentially, look, nobody's guaranteed a career. Nobody's even guaranteed next week. So you have to play every play like it's your last. That's a privilege to step on the field, to play for this team, to play with the guy that you have next to you. To have that sense of focus and that sense of buy-in, you can see why they're having the results that they have, because it literally has been next man up. I just can't believe – I haven't seen anything like this since – probably McCarthy's team in 2010 that had like 16 guys on
really
the IR,
team.
and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. I mean, sometimes things just kind of work your way, and you got to have a good coach and a good quarterback, and you got to have some playmakers. They have all that. They have enough good guys left, but still, to be patchworking it like this, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you see it for yourself.
Yeah, it has been impressive. I mean, from 3 wins now, they're 1 win away from an AFC Championship game appearance. C.J. Stroud been remarkable, of course, missing a couple games with some concussion protocol, but man, he stepped in and just has looked the part from day one. Took a little bit of a learning curve in those first few weeks, but then you can see him figure it out. And just, of course, it's as simple as not turning the ball over, which he's done really well. And especially in these big playoff games. I mean, Indianapolis, that happened last week against Cleveland. And now if you can do the same against Baltimore, I think it makes it close. I think Baltimore, though, is just, with Lamar Jackson and the way they're going right now, that looks like a team that's like, they're looking the part of a Super Bowl contender.
Again, right, it's another team that's taken on the persona of its head coach. It's attention to detail. It's tough, hard-nosed football with a good quarterback, and with some playmakers too. I mean, just don't want to make it sound like it's, all the quarterback going on in Baltimore. They're awfully good, and every year, just like one of those teams every year that's probably doesn't get the respect it deserves for sustained excellence, because they don't win Super Bowls every year, but they're another team that's always seemingly knocking at the door every single year. And then more often than not, they do make a dent in the postseason, and every now and then again they break through. So again, it's a tough matchup for the Texans, but hell, last week was too, and they ran freaking the Browns right off the field.
All right, so
flushed them down the Super Bowl.
Right. I know you don't like making picks, but who you picking between the Texans and the Ravens?
Well, all you have to do is look at last week's pedestrian 3-3 mark on my end. We were picking against the spread last week. If we're picking straight up, there's no way you can pick against the Ravens. So if you're sitting at home, you should therefore bet all your money on the Texans. Green Bay, San Francisco. Again, there's another 10-point dog, Green Bay. Could they do it twice in a row? I doubt it. I mean, San Francisco, come on. They've knocked Green Bay out 2 of the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. I'll go with San Francisco again there. Tampa Bay is sneaky as hell. I mean, that's another team right now because Baker's playing good enough.
Right. If he plays like he did
and their
on
defense,
Monday night.
they got dogs.
Yep.
But again, you're going against a dog team, a roster full of it, and a coach.
Team, yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go with Detroit because they're at home, and Kansas City at Buffalo.
Okay. So one road team gets.
Yeah. I mean, Buffalo, again,
Mahomes,
I just don't know what you're ever going to get week to week with them. You look at their team, the way they play most of the time, you look at them and go, that's a team that nobody should be able to beat. And yet,
Josh Allen usually makes some turnovers or something.
Something crazy happens. But, again, they're good. Yeah. And it's just how good do they want to be?
Right. I'm with you. I will take the Ravens, but I think the Texans keep it close and give Baltimore a scare a little bit. So Baltimore doesn't cover. Texan is within the spread there on that one. San Fran, I'm picking them by a mile just because, sure, Green Bay put it all together last week, but going to San Francisco, coming off a week of rest for them, that's tough sledding.
Right.
I mean, in San Francisco, they've been everybody's favorite, I think.
Yeah.
The Tampa Bay-Detroit game, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. But talk about head coach, the team taking on their head coach's persona. That's Detroit in spades, and I think Dan Campbell gets it done. And man, gets Detroit back to within a game of a Super Bowl. How crazy would that be to see that? I mean, that place went nuts. This past weekend, winning a playoff game, first time in 3 decades.
Yeah, and I guess there are 3 other Aggie coaches on that staff too, besides Aaron Glenn. I mean, that's bringing some Aggies up to make sure that the boys are doing the right things up there in Detroit.
And then I think, give me Buffalo. I don't think Mahomes has the magic this year. I mean, he does, but his skill players are definitely, it's a different toolbox for him. Where I mean, he did find something with I'm blanking on his name now, but they made some connections and it looked like they were playing for a long time together. But I just don't. I think it runs out this year. Them going on the road, not being at KC, that's just a game changer for them. So
now, if Taylor Swift shows up, they win. So just get her in the house.
Yep. Well, quickly, and then we're going to change gears now to Spurs real quick too. The team playing a lot better the past couple weeks or so, Chuck. I know the past couple times out against Atlanta, Boston fell behind early, but in the second half, they've kind of put it together and kept it respectable. I mean, still it's losses, but it's like, hey, they're showing some fight. They're showing that, hey, yeah, we are figuring some things out and being able to play together. Do you foresee them making a trade deadline's coming up here in a couple weeks? Do you foresee them making any moves to maybe do something this year?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they could. Obviously, they got plenty of cap space and all that. I mean, if somebody's going to offer you, a trade where they can kind of salary dump something for trade picks or to get future picks, and then you can keep stockpiling like they have done so well in that regard, I could see something like that happen. But in terms of, trying to acquire a player to help you win more games this year, I just don't know if that's a possibility. But I mean, again, stranger things have happened.
Sure. I mean, I know there's a bunch of rumors. There's been some report. I don't want to say reports, but there's been some talk of, well, hey, DeJounte Murray, maybe a reunion there. That'd be interesting. But again, I think the Spurs are maybe looking a little bit more long term and saying, hey, here's the audition. You see a full season of Wemby, and then as the free agent market comes around, then it's like, okay, yeah, I've seen this guy play. I think I can help. Definitely getting a point guard in there too. I think would help too, because you've seen the impact Trey Jones has,
Yeah.
in that starting five.
I just find it fascinating, like early on, I don't think any of us would call ourselves basketball coaches, but
Right.
we all watched at the beginning. It's like, well, why aren't they just doing this, or why aren't they just doing that? And now they are doing this and that, and things have kind of turned for the up.
For the positive, yeah.
Victor's a big guy. He's a good rebounder. He's a good shot blocker. He's shooting it very well around the basket. Now they've got him playing with his hiney to the
In his
back.
spot, yeah.
And things are working out great. And so, and having Trey Jones run the team, it looks like basketball when he's on the floor, and he seems to know when to dish and when to take it. And so, I don't know. It's much more pleasing on the eyes. That's all I know compared to what we were watching earlier in the year. And playing Jeremy off the ball. He had a nice game the other night too. So
yeah. A lot of learning still left to do, and hopefully they've got some wins coming up. Maybe not kind of now that they've gone through Atlanta and Boston, some winnable games coming up on the schedule before they go out on the rodeo road trip. That's always a galvanizing trip for this team, because when you're away for a month and it's just you guys, well, you're going to find out a lot about your team.
Right. I think so too. And, again, they are getting better. There's no question about it. What we've seen since the beginning of the year, infinitely easier to watch than what we saw in late 2023.
Well, I think that's just going to about wrap it up for us this episode of Sneakers and Cleats. Chuck, thanks so much for coming on and helping out, steer the ship and everything. Anything else you'd like to add? As we send this one off.
I think, you were at the game the other night. There's a human element to this Cowboy thing, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody by telling them I'm a Packer fan. I think a lot of people already know that, but I had way more invested in with the Cowboys. You get a chance to be around those guys and talk with them, and literally small talk with them, when the camera's not going, and get to meet who these guys are as people and some of the guys that you really gravitate to. Hats off. How many times has Terrence Steele, mostly after losses, it's like you can't find him after wins. It's almost like he knows he's going to be the guy that goes out after a tough loss and will talk to people, or Jordan Lewis, so grateful that he was able to make a comeback this year and get back to his rightful place, having a role in the DB rotation. These are guys, again, it's easy to talk when you win. It was nice that CD held court, after a game like that.
Right.
When you're devastated and then you have to go meet the press, I can't imagine wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But it's the Brad Lidges of the world, right? You just gave up a tank to Albert Pujols. It's the worst thing you've ever seen in your life or having to have gone through, and you open up the locker room at the World Series and there's a million media people, and you just go, I'm over here, you guys, and you take all the pressure off everybody in the room. I love that about those guys, and it makes you feel for them, and that's why you pull for them, and you don't want to see them have to go through stuff like that because, again, you're supposed to be unbiased and all that, and I think you can be, but there's still the humanity side of this too, and I just want to thank guys like Terrence Steele. I know we've had a chance to tell him to his face, thank you for everything you do for us, because it's not like we're paying him.
Right.
So, hats off to those guys. And there are other guys, too. We're singling out those guys just because this was a tough week. And for Jordan Lewis to then go back out on Monday and basically take
during the exit interviews,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt. And, like you said, and after we got done with our visit with Terrence on Sunday, everybody was kind of leaving. And I went up and thanked him again of just, hey, thank you for the time, because, they definitely don't have to do it. And some players declined, and that's totally fine. We get it. Some players obviously visibly upset after this one and you see how much it means to them. A lot of people just see the games on TV and then, well, why aren't the results happening? It's so, black and white for them. But when you get around these players and get to know them a little bit more, not so much on a little bit on a personal level, but when you have those interactions and level of, exchange with them, it kind of changes it a little bit. You want them to succeed,
right?
But at the same time, you still have a job to do, which you do. But you want to see them kind of go after because it's a fun run for them.
Right,
So,
and it's different being in that locker room. I mean, it's different if you're playing in Houston or if you're playing in Green Bay, or it's different in Dallas. There's more of a microscope up everybody's keister than any other roster, any other franchise on planet Earth. And so the pressure of having to deal with that every single day, and all those guys are pros. I mean, I can't remember the last really bad egg that I ran into the locker room that wasn't at least respectful enough to say, hey, look, I just don't want to talk today. It's,
Right.
Flipping you the bird or telling you to go F yourself, or there's none of that. Everybody's 100% professional. And, again, it's just the whole human element thing, I think, that does get lost in this because, everybody wants to see the baby and they don't give a damn about the labor pains.
Right. Which is interesting. I know there's a lot of talk about culture. I think some of Mike McCarthy's comments today, just real quickly before wrapping up, he mentioned the championship culture. And of course, he's getting a lot of flack for that because it's just like, what championship? You haven't won anything here in Dallas. But I think that culture of, like you said, everybody's a pro, that brotherhood bond that they always talk about. Yeah, it's kind of cliche sometimes, but it's like, no, it's actually real because you see them, the way they interact with everybody. It makes sense because, it's there. I think that's good for the Cowboys, and that should continue going forward. It's just they got to find something. When it turns to postseason time, there's got to be some sort of different edge, and right now they don't have it.
Right. I mean, this is what's so bad in the finality after the season, right? It's players that you really love and respect, like Tony Pollard, right? And you just think, how could things have been differently, or would they have been differently by how much had he not broken his leg in San Francisco last year? And now you realize that the Cowboys are probably going to have to move on from him.
Yeah.
I mean, if nothing else, to save
the roster change is going to be there's going to be a quarter of this roster that's completely different. So while some of the core guys are going to be there, obviously it's going to be completely different next year, a different vibe, a different feeling. So it's just will be fun to see how it all shakes out when come August, when we get out there in Oxnard. So
yeah, that's right. And then there'll be, hope springs eternal, and we'll do it all again. And this year it's going to be different. And, hopefully it is. I mean, I don't think anybody around here is pulling against them. I mean, I got a few emails this week saying, we don't even want you on the Texans bandwagon. It's like I never wasn't not on it. It's just, hey, man, the Cowboys butter the bread. Again, 20 rating on average this year for their ball games. And then everybody else, single digits, and I'm not knocking that because even that's still a good number. But the Dallas Cowboys, playoff game the other day here in San Antonio, did a 26. The Texans game, highest number I've ever seen from a Texans game, did an 11. So great. It's good for business. The NFL business is good for everybody's business, but ain't nothing like the Dallas Cowboys on TV, as you know.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason why Jerry continues to love on San Antonio down here outside of Dallas. So, San Antonio fans, or Cowboys fans in spades down here in San Antonio. So
highest rated TV market in the country for NFL football that doesn't have a team. Madison, Wisconsin's number 2.
There you go. So dropping knowledge for you as we head out the door. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to give a like and subscribe at every place you get your podcast now, Apple, Spotify, the podcast app. I don't know, it pops up everywhere nowadays, so be sure to like it. Matt will be back with you, I'm sure, next week and have everything running much more smoothly. Until next time, enjoy the games this weekend, everybody. See ya.